I don't talk about this with anyone. Not because I signed something, I did sign things, a lot of things, but because the people I'd want to tell wouldn't have the frame of reference to hear it. They'd listen, and they'd nod, and they'd think I was describing stress. And then they'd suggest I see someone. So I just don't bring it up. My name is Carla Vasquez. For 11 months, I worked as a maintenance systems technician at a facility called Lakefield East, which sits, or sat, roughly 240 feet beneath a stretch of unremarkable federal land in southern New Mexico. You wouldn't find it on a map. You wouldn't find it on Google Earth. If you drove past the surface site, you'd see a fenced acre of gravel, 2 ventilation structures that look like squat grain silos, and a modular guard station with a boardman inside it. That's all. Everything else is underneath. I was hired through a contractor called Van Halcourt Systems, which provides technical personnel to government clients. My interview was in El Paso, in a conference room with no windows, with 2 people who never gave their last names. They said the job was subsurface systems maintenance at a research installation. Climate control, filtration, pressure regulation, backup power. They said the rotation was 14 days on, 14 days off. They said the pay was $142,000 a year. They said I'd need to pass a T5 background investigation and a medical screening with a cardiologist. They didn't say why the cardiologist. I said yes because I needed the money and because I'd been doing HVAC work on military installations for 6 years and was tired of the sun. They gave me a start date of March 3, 2024. In the intervening 6 weeks, 2 investigators came to my apartment in Las Cruces on separate occasions and asked me questions I still don't entirely understand the purpose of. One of them wanted to know if I'd ever experienced déjà vu more than twice in a single week. I said I didn't think so. She wrote that down. The other asked whether I had any recurring dreams involving descent, stairs, elevators, ladders, swimming downward. I told him I sometimes dreamed about the pool at my high school. He wrote that down, too. I passed. Whatever I passed. On March 3rd, I reported to the surface site at 5 a.m. A van drove me and 3 others down a concrete ramp that spiraled for what felt like 10 minutes, though the lack of windows made it hard to judge. When they opened the doors, we were in a loading bay that smelled like new carpet and machine oil. A woman named Deirdre Chin met us. She was our shift lead, had been working at Lakefield East for 2.5 years, and had the flattened, pragmatic friendliness of someone who'd learned to make small talk in a place where small talk was all you were allowed to make. She gave us a tour that lasted 4 hours and covered, I later realized, maybe a third of the facility. What I saw, a main corridor, they called it the arterial, about a quarter-mile long, with brushed steel walls and that specific institutional lighting that makes everything look like it's 2 a.m. regardless of the actual time. Off the arterial ran smaller hallways designated by color-coded floor strips. Blue led to residential. Green to operational. Yellow to something called supportive research, which I was told I would never need to enter. Red to the deep levels, which Deirdre didn't walk us through and didn't mention again. Our quarters were simple. A room slightly larger than a college dorm, a shared bathroom for every 4 rooms, a common area with couches and a television that received 4 channels, all of them a day behind the actual broadcast schedule, which Deirdre explained as a signal relay issue. I didn't question it then. Here's the thing about Lakefield East that I need you to understand before I go any further: no one who worked there in a support capacity, maintenance, food service, sanitation, logistics, knew what the facility's research purpose was. That wasn't unusual, compartmentalization is standard in classified environments. What was unusual was that no one seemed to be doing the research. I maintained climate systems, so I had access to nearly every room that required ventilation, filtration, or thermal regulation. In 11 months, I never saw a laboratory in active use. I saw rooms that looked like labs, clean rooms, spectrographic equipment behind glass, computing clusters running unnamed processes. But no researchers. No scientists. No one in a white coat or goggles. The support staff supported each other. The machine kept running, and the machine's only visible function was keeping itself running. I mentioned this to Deirdre at the end of my first rotation. She was filling out a shift change form in the common area. She looked at me with this expression, not annoyed, not secretive, just patient in a way that felt practiced. The work happens on schedules we're not synced to, she said. Different rotation. You won't overlap with research personnel. That's by design. I accepted that. For a while. The rules were where things started to feel wrong, though wrong isn't quite the word. Incomplete is closer. During orientation, Deirdre handed each of us a laminated card. It was small, about the size of a playing card, and it listed 7 directives. Not safety rules. Not emergency procedures. Behavioral directives, phrased as flat imperatives. I still remember them. Not because I memorized them. Because after 11 months in that place, they were burned into the architecture of my day the way breathing is. 1. Maintain your position in the arterial when the amber lights cycle. Do not enter any corridor until they resolve to white. 2. If you hear your name spoken in a hallway you are not currently occupying, do not respond and do not investigate. Log the time and location on your shift report. 3. Keep all doors to unoccupied residential rooms closed and latched. If you find one open, close it without entering. Note the room number. 4. Do not eat in the deep-level access corridors. Do not bring food below the green line floor. 5. If a member of your shift begins speaking in a language they do not know, remove yourself from the conversation and contact the medical bay. Do not attempt to translate or transcribe what they are saying. 6. Between 0200 and 0330 hours, do not use the intercom system for any reason. Route all communications through written notes delivered by hand. 7. If you encounter a person you do not recognize in any section of the facility, do not interact. Proceed to the nearest checkpoint and file an unverified contact report. Do not describe the person's appearance in the report. State only the time and section. That last part, do not describe the person's appearance, is the one I kept circling back to in my head, early on. Every other rule, I could construct a rational explanation for. Amber lights might indicate atmosphere cycling. The named thing could be an acoustic anomaly in the ventilation ducts. I'd heard stranger things in pressurized tunnel systems. The food rule could be contamination protocol. The intercom rule could be a maintenance window. But why would they not want a description of an unrecognized person? What kind of security protocol tells you to report an intruder but forbids you from saying what they look like? I asked Deirdre. It's not your job to describe them, she said. It's your job to report the contact. But how does anyone follow up without a description? She looked at me the way she always did when I pushed on the rules. Patient. Practiced. And underneath, something I eventually recognized as pity. They already know what they look like, Carla. I let it go. For the first 3 months, the rules felt like background noise, strange but inert, the way a loading dock safety poster becomes invisible after the first week. I followed them. Everyone did. You'd see people stop in the arterial when the amber light came on, just stand there mid-step like a game of red light green light, waiting for white. Nobody joked about it. Nobody questioned it. And the lights always resolved within 30 to 90 seconds, so it never felt like an imposition. I heard my name twice in corridors I wasn't in. Both times in the first month. Both times from the direction of the yellow line hallway, supportive research. The voice was female, flat, mid-sentence, as if I'd caught the tail end of someone saying my name in the middle of a longer word or phrase. I logged it both times. My shift reports went into a slot in the wall outside the operations office. I never saw anyone collect them. I never received feedback. The slot never filled up. In May, I started noticing the doors. My job took me into the residential wing regularly. I was maintaining the ventilation balancing for that section, which required access to ceiling plenums in alternate rooms. The rooms I entered were always unoccupied, or at least were supposed to be. Lakefield East, from what I could tell, had housing for about 80 people, but our shift was only 12. The rest of the wing was empty. And every third or fourth time I walked through, I'd find a door open. Not wide open. Ajar. Just enough that you could see the dark line of the gap between the door and the frame. I closed them and logged the room numbers, as instructed. Room 11. Room 27. Room 34. Room 19. Room 27 again. Room 8. The pattern, if it was a pattern, didn't correspond to anything I could map, not ventilation cycles, not my own schedule, not the schedules of anyone else on shift. I mentioned it to a guy named Terrence, who handled the electrical systems. He shrugged. Pressure differentials, he said. The latches on those doors are garbage. 40-year-old hardware. That was a reasonable explanation. I wanted it to be the right one. But I'd been working with pressurized environments for 6 years, and pressure differentials don't open doors in one direction only. They push or pull depending on the gradient. These doors always opened inward, into the rooms. As if something inside was pulling them open. I didn't say that to Terrence. I didn't say it to anyone. I logged the numbers and I closed the doors and I went back to my job. June. The amber light started lasting longer. Not dramatically, not in a way that would alarm you if you weren't tracking it. But I was tracking it, because I tracked everything. It's the maintenance technician's disease. You start quantifying your environment because that's what the job trains you to do. In March, the amber cycles lasted 30 to 45 seconds. By June, they were averaging a minute 15. By July, some of them pushed past 2 minutes. 2 minutes of standing still in a corridor 240 feet underground, watching amber light pulse across brushed steel walls, hearing nothing but the air handlers and your own breathing. I brought it up at a shift meeting. Deirdre noted it. She said she'd report it to operations. I watched her write it in the log. The log went into the slot. That was the end of it. Here's what changed in August, and this is where I need to be precise. On August 9th, I was dispatched to check a filtration unit in a section I hadn't been to before. Sublevel 4, past the red line floor, in a corridor that wasn't on my standard map. The work order came through the normal system, printed on the standard form, time-stamped, approved by a signature I didn't recognize. I brought it to Deirdre. That's a valid order, she said, glancing at it. I've never been to sub 4. Now you have a reason to go. Whose signature is that? She looked at it again. Her expression didn't change, but her hand stopped moving. Operations, she said. Who's in operations? Carla. She set the form down. Go fix the filter. The elevator to sub 4 was at the far end of the red corridor. It required my badge and a 6-digit code that was printed on the work order. The elevator car was larger than it needed to be, industrial, brushed metal, no mirror, no music, no indicator panel showing floors. Just a single button. You pressed it and you went down. The descent took 40 seconds. I counted. When the doors opened, I was standing at the beginning of a corridor that looked exactly like the arterial. Same dimensions, same lighting, same brushed steel. But the floor had no color-coded strips. And the air was different. Not bad, not stale or thin. Just different in a way I couldn't immediately name. It felt like the air in a room where someone has just stopped speaking. The filtration unit was in the third room on the left. The repair was routine, a clogged pre-filter, 5-minute job. I replaced it, logged the work, and started back toward the elevator. I stopped. I stopped because there were names on the doors. Not every door. But some of them. Small nameplates, the kind you'd see in a hospital or a college dormitory. Brushed metal, engraved. I walked close enough to read the nearest one. Vasquez, C. My hand was on the nameplate before I decided to touch it. It was warm. Not room temperature. Warm. Like skin. The door was locked. My badge didn't open it. I pressed my ear against it and heard nothing, no hum, no air handler, no ambient sound of any kind. It was the quietest thing I'd ever experienced. Not silence. Silence is the absence of noise. This was something else. This was the sound of a room that had never contained noise in the first place. I stepped back. I looked down the corridor. 4 other doors had nameplates. Chen, D. Okonkwo, T. Marshall, R. Park, J. Deirdre. Terrence. Rob Marshall from Sanitation. Ji-Yun Park from Food Service. Every name I could read belonged to someone on my shift. I went back to the elevator. I pressed the button. I ascended for 40 seconds. I walked to the common area and I sat on the couch and I stared at the television for a long time. The news was from August 8th. A wildfire in Oregon. A congressional hearing. Weather for cities I'd never been to. I didn't log the nameplates. I didn't tell Deirdre. I didn't tell anyone. And this is the part where, in a different kind of story, the narrator would begin investigating, sneaking back down to sub 4, trying other badges, looking for answers. I need you to understand that I didn't do that. I wasn't brave. I wasn't curious. I was a woman making $142,000 a year in a place where asking questions had been engineered out of the social contract so thoroughly that the impulse itself felt transgressive. I went back to work. I maintained the filters and the climate systems and I followed the rules. But the rules stopped working. Not for me. For everyone. All at once. September 14th, 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I was awake. I've always been a bad sleeper, worse underground, and I was in the common area drinking tea when the intercom activated. Every speaker in the facility, simultaneously. And a voice I'd never heard, a woman's voice, not a recording, not synthesized, said 7 words. Thank you for participating. The study concludes. Then white noise. Then silence. Then the amber lights came on and didn't cycle off. I stood up. In the hallway, I could see other doors opening, Terrence, Rob, Ji-Yun, others. Everyone squinting into amber light, looking at each other for an explanation no one had. Deirdre came out of her room last. She was dressed. Fully dressed, shoes on, badge clipped. As if she'd been waiting. Everyone to the common area, she said. Her voice was calm. Now. We gathered. 12 of us. The full shift. The amber light pulsed steadily, throwing everything into that nauseating orange-yellow cast that makes people look sick. What's happening? Rob asked. Deirdre stood in front of the television. She didn't turn it off. The day-old news played behind her in silence. I'm going to tell you something, she said, and I need you to understand that I'm telling you because the directive that prevented me from telling you has just been rescinded. Nobody spoke. There is no research team, she said. There has never been a research team. The research personnel that you were told operated on a different rotation do not exist. The equipment in the laboratories has never been used. The computing clusters run a single monitoring program. It monitors us. Someone, I think it was Ji-Yun, said, "What?" Lakefield East is a behavioral study, Deirdre said. The subjects are the support staff. We are the experiment. The rules, the card, the 7 directives, are the experimental variables. The study measures long-term compliance with arbitrary authority in isolated, high-trust environments. It has been running for 9 years across 4 personnel rotations. We are the 4th. The room was quiet in a way I recognized. That sub-4 quiet. The sound of a space that has never contained the noise you expected to be there. The doors in the residential wing that open on their own, Deirdre said, open because they are being opened remotely, by the monitoring system, to test whether you follow Directive 3. The amber lights extend their duration incrementally to measure your tolerance threshold for unexplained compliance. The intercom events are generated to see whether you follow Directive 6. The names in the hallways are generated by a speaker array to test Directive 2. The names on sub-4, I said. I didn't plan to say it. It came out. Deirdre looked at me. And for the first time in 6 months, her expression wasn't patient or practiced. It was something else. Something that scared me more than anything I'd seen in that facility. She looked confused. What names on sub-4, she said. The nameplates. On the doors. Our names. Your name. Deirdre shook her head slowly. There's nothing on sub-4. Sub-4 is a storage level. There are no rooms. I was there. August 9th. The work order. Carla, I approved your work order for sub-level 2. Filtration Unit 2-7C. You went to sub-level 2. The room was looking at me. 12 people, amber light, that silence. I took the elevator down for 40 seconds, I said. Sub-2 is a 10-second descent. I counted. Deirdre's mouth opened, then closed. She turned to the television. The wildfire in Oregon burned across the screen behind her. I don't know what that is, she said quietly. That's not part of the study. I want to tell you that someone took charge. That we called the surface, demanded extraction, got answers. What happened instead is that the amber lights resolved to white at 3:30 a.m., exactly on schedule, the schedule that Deirdre had just told us was an experimental variable, and the elevator at the surface ramp activated and a voice on the intercom, a different voice this time, male, administrative, said, Shift 4, report to the loading bay for extraction. Personal effects will be forwarded. We left. All 12 of us. We rode the van up the spiral ramp in silence. The surface was cold and dark and the stars were out, and I stood in the gravel parking area and breathed outside air for the first time in 14 days and felt nothing. The debrief happened in El Paso, in a different windowless conference room, with different people who didn't give their last names. They told me the study was a Department of Defense behavioral compliance project. They told me my participation was valuable. They gave me a separation packet with an NDA, a final paycheck, and a number for a counseling service. They told me the facility would be decommissioned. I signed everything. I drove back to Las Cruces. I sat in my apartment and I looked at the walls and I thought about the door on sub 4 with my name on it and the warmth of the nameplate and the silence on the other side that wasn't silence. 3 months later, in December, I got a piece of mail. No return address. Inside was a single laminated card, the same size as the directive card from orientation. The same brushed metal text. It said, Directive 8. If you remember a floor that was not part of the study, do not return to the site. Do not describe the floor's contents to former colleagues. Do not attempt to contact the previous 3 rotations. If you dream of descent, note the frequency but do not seek treatment. This is not a directive from the study. This is a directive from what the study was built to conceal. I put the card in a drawer. I closed the drawer. I went to bed. I dreamed about going down. That was 4 months ago. The dreams have not stopped. They've gotten longer. More detailed. The corridor on sub 4 extends further each time. There are more doors now. More names. Names I don't recognize. Names in scripts I can't read. And at the end of the corridor, every time, there is a door with no nameplate, and it is open, and the sound coming out of it is not silence and not noise but something I think I'm being taught to recognize, the way you learn a language by immersion, the way meaning assembles itself in your sleep. I haven't gone back to the site. I looked it up on satellite imagery. The fenced acre is still there. The ventilation structures are still there. The guard station is empty. But last week, I woke up at 2:47 a.m. and my apartment was filled with amber light. Not from outside. Not from any fixture. Just ambient, sourceless amber, pulsing at the same interval. And I stood in the center of my living room and I waited for it to resolve to white. It did. It took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. It's getting longer. I don't know what compliance means anymore, when the rules follow you out. I don't know what it means that I still obey them, that I stood there, in my own apartment, in the city I was born in, and I waited. I didn't move. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't call anyone. I stood still and I waited for permission to continue through my own home. The study concluded. Deirdre told us what we were. They gave us separation packets and counseling numbers and told us the facility would be decommissioned. But something on sub 4 didn't get the memo. Something underneath the study, underneath the purpose of the study, is still running. And whatever it's measuring now, I don't think it needs the facility anymore. I think it just needs us to keep following the rules. And I think the worst part, the part one lie in bed and think about it 2:47 in the morning while the amber light that shouldn't be there pulses through my apartment, is that I don't know whether I keep following them because I'm afraid of what happens if I stop, or because I've become something that no longer has the capacity to stop. I used to be a maintenance technician. I maintained systems. I think now I'm the system being maintained. If you're reading this, I'm not asking for help. I don't think help applies to what this is. I'm telling you because Directive 8 says not to describe the floor's contents to former colleagues. It doesn't say anything about strangers. And I've learned to read the rules very carefully.